Hey, so I wanted to try something new. It's a fun little experiment, mostly fun for me. I have no idea if this will be fun for you, but hopefully it's useful. I very often actually talk to myself while I'm thinking through an idea that I want to write about, just to kind of work through the ideas while I get to a point where I can write about it. And so I thought, hey, why don't I just put the camera on? And first of all, it would help me to be able to like review some of the things that I've talked through, but also it might actually be useful content for people out there to see the ideas that I'm wrestling with and see what I'm thinking about. So there was an idea that I was thinking about and want to write about soon, which is something along the lines of thinking like birds. And there's two key concepts. One is mastication and the other is regurgitation. Now, what does that mean? That sounds weird, complicated, very long words, but it's really important. Really, it centers around this idea that there is an epidemic of people regurgitating ideas and people not thinking from first principles or thinking about ideas deeply. You will see this on Twitter, you will see this on blogs, you will see this all over the place. This pandemic of people, at cocktail parties, wherever, just they hear an idea from a book or from a blog or from a podcast and they just regurgitate it straight away without any deep thinking. They haven't spent any time wrestling with these ideas. They might not even fully understand exactly what they're thinking about or what they're reading or what they're doing. And what made me just start thinking again about this idea, I'd already written some basic notes down, but I was listening to Anne Law on a podcast. Anne Law is the founder of Nest Labs and she does some really awesome work. She's going to be coming on the podcast soon. And she was mentioning a book that she'd been reading, which is about, what was it about? I forgot. But she was reading a book and she mentioned that the book mentioned a study. And so actually she's going to go and check what were the research methods of the study just because she's interested. And that stood out to me because that's the mark of a scientist. And Anne Law actually did study in the neuroscience department of King's College. Sorry, my dog's making noise. So yeah, she actually did study in the neuroscience department of King's College. And so that makes perfect sense. But the truth is, all of us should be doing exactly the same thing. How many people do you ever go and look at a study that's mentioned in a book? I mention studies all the time in my newsletter. Some of them I do try and go back and, read through the actual study, but it's tedious and a lot of people really don't do it. And so the key point here is distance from the truth. Okay, so let's finally dig into these two topics that I've been kind of, dancing around: mastication and regurgitation. Let's start with the second one, regurgitation. That is a word that's used quite commonly by people. People say, hey, you're regurgitating this idea, you're regurgitating these talking points. But I don't think people actually think about what that word means. Regurgitation is what birds do when an adult bird wants to feed a baby bird. And so baby birds, they can't chew all the food, they can't process everything. So the adult bird will eat the food, they will chew it, they will swallow it, and then they will vomit it back up into the baby bird's mouth. And so the baby bird just basically eats this pre-eaten food, which is easier for them to digest, easier for them to get the nutrients that they need, etc. But obviously, there's a few problems with this. One, you can already see how this relates to everyday life. It's this idea that, people read something that other people have already done the hard work of chewing, right? You read a blog post that is based on someone's book, that was based on a study, and they've already done the hard work of chewing and eating the food. They vomit it back into your mouth and you say, yum, yum, thank you. But what you're getting is not like real food. And so this connects to the concept of mastication. And mastication is essentially just chewing. So obviously, you may know, when you chew food, what you're doing is you're coating it in your saliva, right? There's enzymes in your saliva that are helping to break down the food for the nutrients so that your body can more easily absorb the nutrients once you swallow the food, once it's in your gut. And so actually, the more that you masticate, the more that you chew your food, the more it gets broken down, the easier it is to extract the nutrients, and the more First of all, the more calories that you put on, so the more calories you get out of the meal, which can be both good and bad. But the point is, more mastication equals more nutrition. More nutrition. So the more you chew your food, the more you get out of it. What does that have to do with what we've just been talking about? It's this idea that chewing with your food, the analogy is chewing your food is chewing with ideas, wrestling with ideas. And that's what is becoming very scarce now. That's what people are doing less and less. People are not wrestling with the core ideas. They are only swallowing abstractions, right? Pre-chewed food in very bite-sized portions that are very easy to digest, but they don't get the full nutrients of them because they didn't chew it themselves. And not only that, but the problem that you get, and this also goes back to regurgitation, is that very often people are not, the regurgitated food that you're getting is not one time removed from the original source of the nutrition. It's multiple times removed. So if you think about the entire life cycle of many ideas that are prevalent in popular culture, you have a scientist or a researcher that does a study. They are the closest to the truth because they discovered the truth. They ran a study. The study produced data. They crunched the data and created, the first abstraction, which was the research paper. You are already at that point one level removed from the truth. The truth was the data itself. What actually happened? What were the actual results? Someone, the researcher, translates those results into a study, and they have, a conclusion that they can derive from the source data. They might have particular principles. They might have a particular methodology, a way that they have approached the study, which may color the results that they get. So the conclusion that they come to is not necessarily the truth. That is, it's an abstracted version of the truth, but it's still reliable. So a lot of the time, if you come across a scientific study, there's an extent to which you can rely on it if you're reading the actual study. However, just remember, you are still one layer abstracted from the truth because it's already gone through one layer of translation. Okay, but the thing is, most people are not going and directly reading the studies either. Where do they go? The next layer of abstraction is a book. Someone will write a book, and in the book, they will reference a study. And now you are 2 layers abstracted, 2 layers removed from the truth, right? The person who wrote the book has read the study, and the study was translated by the researcher who was the closest to the truth. And so now, the 2 people have chewed the food, absorbed some of the nutrients. The researcher absorbed all the best nutrients because they did the study. They were closest to the truth. They masticated, they did all the chewing, chew, because you have to go through some rigorous process to get your study published. And so they did a lot of chewing, they absorbed a lot of nutrients, and they gave the rest out in a published paper. Because remember, they also chose what not to put in their paper. So it's gone through a bit of a process. Then the person writing the book, they do some chewing, right? They're doing some research for their book. They're doing all this thinking around their book. And they choose what to discard and what to keep. And so they have already taken a lot of the nutrients. And then they give you the rest, which is now in the form of a book. But here's the problem. Most people also don't read the books. These days, loads of people love book summaries and podcasts and all these other things that are, again, various forms of abstractions. So we're already at layer 3 of the abstraction chain. We go to layer 4. Someone writes a blog post about the book that they've read. The book was based on the study. The study was based on the research. You're 4 layers abstracted from the truth. Again, the problem is most people don't even read the blog post. Someone will listen to a podcast of someone mentioning something they heard on a summarized version of the book, a summarized version of a blog post. It could even be an AI summary of a blog post that was based on a book that was based on a study that was based on research data. So now you're down this chain, 5 or 6 layers of abstractions deep, far, far away from the truth. Each person in that chain, chew, they had their mastication. They absorbed all the best nutrients. They chose what to keep. They chose what to throw away. You get the rest. And so now what you have is this very abstracted version of the data. When you get that information, you're getting kind of like the lowest quality. you're basically getting a smoothie now. You're not getting food. You're getting a smoothie, something that is just easy to digest. You can swallow it. This is your AG1. You don't even know what's in it. You don't know all the fruits and everything that went into it. All you have is some sludge, and you're just going to drink that sludge, and you think you're smart because you've been drinking sludge all day. You've drank, 5 portions of sludge, and you think, whoa, man, I'm so healthy. But are you? And so this is the problem, because there's 2 problems for the person. One is that you haven't really internalized or wrestled with these ideas. And the second is you don't actually know the validity of those ideas, the veracity of those ideas, because you're so far removed from the truth of them. Okay, so all of that belongs in the world of mastication. Now let's kind of return to the regurgitation aspect, which leads me to some other ideas that I also want to write about, which is this idea of kind of alchemy and reverse alchemy. So alchemy is the process of, converting one thing into another thing. In this context, I think there are some people like Naval Ravikant and Paul Graham, and the list goes on, but those are 2 really popular examples of people that are really good at turning complex thoughts into simple words. This is a form of mastication and a form of regurgitation, but that is a process of alchemy, which is really good, and it's great that they can do some of this digesting for us, because otherwise you'd have to think of everything from scratch for yourself. So I'm not making the point that everyone has to go, you have to read every single study, you have to do all the work yourself. That's not the point that I'm making. The point that I'm making is, this is great. It's great that you have some thinkers that can think deeply about a problem and elucidate it very carefully and succinctly in a lovely blog post that you can digest, or a podcast or something like that. But then I think for this to be more useful, more people need to do what I call reverse alchemy. Now, like I mentioned, alchemy is the process of turning complex thoughts into simple words. Reverse alchemy is turning simple words into complex thoughts. This is one way to escape the regurgitation trap. That's what I'm going to call it. I just made it up now. That's what I'm going to call it. I think there's 2 ways to escape the regurgitation trap. This is one of them, reverse alchemy. So, reverse alchemy is taking simple words and turning them back into complex ideas. So how do you do that? There's 2 ways. One is taking notes. And there's 3 layers of abstractions in notes that come to my mind. Layer 1 is highlights. I think a lot of people do this. They read books on Kindle, they make highlights. I think that's the worst version of notes that you could possibly make. And I'm sorry to anyone that I might offend, but I just strongly believe that to be true. Because when you're thinking about this concept, right, what we're trying to get to is reverse alchemy. The simplest way you could try to get there, and probably the least effective way, is just highlighting what someone else has written. Highlighting the simple words requires very little thought. You're not wrestling with these ideas at all. You're not doing anything. You're just calling attention to them in a fancy yellow, highlight. That's all you're doing. That requires no thought, no premeditation, nothing. And so I'm mostly against highlighting. And that's why lots of people have problems with highlighting. They don't think they have problems. They think highlighting is great. And then they have to spend thousands of pounds learning all these knowledge management systems, thinking, what do I do with my highlights? I have so many highlights. All these books I've been reading, what am I going to... It's because this is a very poor form of abstraction. Kind of useless. If you want to do it, be my guest, but I don't do it. I don't do it. Okay, so highlights is kind of level 1. Level 2 would be notes, making notes on what you've written. So you've read someone say something and you write down like a summation of what they say. And I think that's closer to reverse alchemy, but it's not quite there. Why is it not quite there? Because again, think about how complex are the thoughts that you generate from going through this process of just making notes on what someone else has said. All you're doing is summarizing their points. It doesn't really require you to wrestle with the ideas a ton. You only need to wrestle with them to the extent that you can summarize them. And that could be as simple as just reading it. You read it once and you can write down what was the summary of what I just came across. So that's level 2. Level 3, and I think this is the best version, the best way, the strongest form of abstraction, the closest that you're going to get to this reverse alchemy, is writing original notes. Now, writing original notes means you're not just writing word for word what someone else said. You're not just writing a summary of what someone else said. You are writing your own original thoughts. What do you think about what they said? You are responding to what they said. You are arguing with what they said. And I do this all the time, and I would encourage everyone to do this. Do your best to do this with every piece of information that you come across. When someone says something, try and, if you're going to make the note, always make notes. I make notes about everything, and I always recommend making notes. But make notes that try and disagree with what the person said, even if you agree with them. Why might they be wrong? That's a great question to ask yourself in any context. Why might I be wrong? What could be wrong about what they've just said? What could be right? Where do I disagree? Where do I agree? And what do I think? What are some follow-on thoughts? And also, the more you make notes, and this is why I always highly recommend it, the more you make notes, the more you can connect these dots together. And this is where the magic happens. This is what James Altucher calls idea sex. And this is precisely the point. Even this video or the notes I was originally making are around this idea of, thinking like birds, right? Because this is what birds do and this is what people do. And so the point is, the more data points that you gather from reading lots of different things, the more you'll be able to connect disparate ideas. And so you'll be uniquely placed to come to conclusions that the original author couldn't come to. Why? Because they didn't read all the stuff that you've read. And so the more widely you read, you consume lots of different types of data, the more you can put these things together in a very unique way that's unique to you. So as an example, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I watched a show on Netflix, I think, Cyberpunk. I forget the precise name, but it was Cyberpunk Edge Runner. That was really cool. Spoiler alert, loads of people die, so it's not a spoiler, but someone important dies. And I was able to write a newsletter about, connecting that dot of I watched this show to another idea that was related to, productivity or philosophy or to something else. And I am uniquely placed to make that point because I've connected these disparate dots. So the point is that writing your own original notes is the best form of abstraction. And that is what brings you the closest to what I'm calling reverse alchemy. And by doing that, you are having to wrestle with the ideas. You are having to convert the simple words that you've just read or you've just consumed or you've just heard on a podcast or you might be hearing me say now, convert that into complex thoughts. So I would actually urge you, if you're listening to this right now, why would you disagree with me? Disagree with me 100%. And think about why. There must be a way. There must be a vector. There must be some element, something that I've said that you should disagree with. Don't just agree for the sake of it, even though I think I'm correct. But there has to be, add something new to the conversation. Feel free to reply. I have no idea where I'm going to post this, but feel free to reply and tell me what your original thoughts are about this. And I think the more people that do that, the better. The more we can come closer to having a wider array of original ideas. And I think, one thing that is startling to me is if you think about someone like Paul Graham that writes these incredible essays, he thinks extremely deeply about loads of these ideas. I'm surprised to this day about the depth of responses that it generates. It generates a lot of commentary. I see so many people sharing screenshots of Paul Graham essays and they say, oh, new Paul Graham essay just dropped. Everyone's dropping their screenshots. Everyone's dropping the things that they love. Very few people write responses. Why would you disagree? Tell me what... He's not God. None of these people are God. Like, they don't know everything. They haven't thought of everything. What did they miss out? What did they not cover? What did they not pay enough attention to? There will always be something, right? Either to further their point, expand on it, give me more examples, or contradict them, give me different thoughts, go in a slightly different direction. And I'll leave you with one more tip. This is something that I do quite often. Okay, I'll give you 2 tips. You're very lucky. So there's 2 different variations of the same thing. So one of them is when I'm reading a post that I find very interesting, try rewriting it word by word, not word by word, but like sentence by sentence. And this is kind of combining the layers of abstraction that I mentioned before. But each sentence that you read what the original person said and rewrite it in the simplest way possible to get to the point, the most precise point of what that person was trying to say. So someone gives you a long-winded sentence, they say all of this, you just write down in your notes, your version of their post, what's the basic premise? What are they trying to say? What points are they trying to make? And you just do that as you go sentence by sentence through their entire post. And then as you do that, think about every premise you're writing down. So as you're writing down each premise from each sentence that they write, then think about each premise and think seriously about it. Is every premise that they make 100% correct? Because sometimes wrapped up in some fancy words is a premise that is easy to overlook, right? It's easy to overlook exactly what it is that they're saying. And if you overlook exactly what it is that they're saying, you can be just led like a lamb to the slaughter to some facile conclusion. You end up all the way over here in camp, in a faraway place, and you have no idea how you got there. But if you break down, what's the logical structure of the argument? What's the, point by point? What is the point that they're making? Example by example. I've done this quite recently with a Paul Graham essay. Example by example, some of the examples, maybe I disagree, and write down what you disagree with. Some of them you agree. And, as you wrestle with each piece, try and think about, what did they miss? Does this stand up by itself in isolation, this one point? If you read it as a whole, of course it makes sense, but that's not the point. Go through it point by point. Examine each brick that is holding up the entire weight of the point that this person is trying to make. Examine each brick, see what you agree with, what you disagree with, and write that out for yourself. That's a really great exercise. I do it quite often, and this is a sneaky tip. If you're trying to write a newsletter like I do, I write 3 newsletters a week or sometimes more. This is pretty much how it goes. All you have to do is every time you read something, every time you encounter something, think about why you agree, think about why you disagree. Take every single example that they have, every single point that they make, and take each of these things in its own direction, and you will have tons of ideas. You will never run out of things to write. So that's just example number 1. Example number 2, which is kind of a variation of that, but it's another thing that I do. When I listen to podcasts, maybe as you're listening to this, usually I do this at the end. So very often, if I'm listening to a podcast and I like it, I'll just be making notes as I'm listening. So I make notes, and then later on, I might write something based on some ideas that I have. But something cool that I've been doing that you might want to try is that if it was good and I've just finished it, I'll go back and I'll listen again. But the second time I go back, especially, for example, if it's on YouTube, I will, hopefully, if they are kind, they will have timestamps in their transcript. I will copy and paste the timestamps into a notes document. And I will go to each of the timestamps and I'll start listening through. And every time I reach one of the points that they're about to make, I will start listening. And then I will just stop. As soon as I will just listen until something they say provokes something in my mind. And I do this before listening to them. Don't let them finish the point that they're making. Let them start every point that they're about to make and then pause. And then you see, how would you finish that sentence? How would you finish that point? Where does the same core idea take you? So if they've got something in their timestamp, so before you listen to it, they say, oh, we talk about this. What does that mean to you? What do you think that means? Before you hear them say it, you think about it for yourself. And another way to do this, and I've also done this, is with blog posts as well. Take someone's blog post title, don't read the article, and write a post. And, write your own ideas of where that nugget, where does that thought take you? And then go back and read their post. And then as you're reading it, you can see, first of all, where you've gone off the point, where you've gone in a different direction. But also sometimes it'll give you inspiration to add to your own little thing. So anyway, I've rambled for a while. But I think overall, the point was, we need to get away from regurgitated thoughts. Point number 1. Point number 2, we need to start chewing on our own ideas. Mastication is good for you. You want to extract as many nutrients as possible from everything that you plan to digest. Don't just drink sludge. Don't just drink smoothies. try and find some whole food that you can digest. What does that mean? Go up the chain, up levels of abstraction. Go and find books, go and find original research, go and find studies, and try and digest them for yourself and see what more you can learn. Then, as you're immersing yourself in all of this information, make original notes. If you can't make an original notes, at least make some notes or even make highlights, but that's the worst version of this. But the point is, you want to perform reverse alchemy. You want to be able to convert. Anytime you come across an abstraction, just know that they have already done some work of chewing the food, extracting the nutrients. They are giving you a simplified version of the original, and that means they have done their version of alchemy. They have tried to do some alchemy of converting some complex thoughts, complex idea into simple words. Anytime you come across simple words, try and convert those simple words into a complex idea of your own, an idea that exists in your own mind. And then the final bit of magic, convert those complex thoughts into simple words again. And you have your own alchemy. You have your own version of something that's cool and original, something you can put out into the world. And that's how I write hundreds of posts a year. And I think loads of people would probably find that extremely useful as well. So I think that was cool. That was very useful for me, thinking on the spot and elucidating an idea that's been rattling around in my head. Hopefully you find that useful. Let me know if you have thoughts. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with. Let me know if there is anything I could expand more on. Thanks.